This lecture is on diseases of salad vegetables. We'll primarily be talking about lettuce, onion, and garlic. All of these crops are grown in Ohio, and as well as others, but these are some of the most important ones, particularly produced on muck soils. Now, muck soils are very high organic matter soils that were developed or produced over 100 years ago by draining swamps in northern Ohio. And these soils are very, again, high organic matter. They hold a lot of nutrients, and they're very fine soil, very black, and very high values. They have too many nutrients in them to basically produce a lot of things. Tomatoes won't grow well on them, and other crops. But for salad vegetables are particularly well suited to muck soils. Now again, lettuce, onions, and garlic are also produced on conventional, typical soils in Ohio. But a lot of the diseases we see, and it can be on any type of soil, but we often see diseases on muck soils because there are limited acreage of these types of soils. There are a couple thousand acres in Ohio in primarily two different locations, one in Huron County and one in the sort of straddling Stark and Portage counties. These are, again, northern Ohio. And because of that lack of acreage, there really isn't the crop rotation that should be done for these to reduce the effects of these diseases. We'll start with the bacterial and phytoplasma disease of lettuce, and throughout this lecture, we'll only be focusing on the diseases that are highlighted in this blue-green color. There will be some others that I may mention, but these are the important ones. So lettuce and endive are the major sort of salad-type vegetables that are produced. Primarily it's lettuce, though, and we don't produce much head lettuce, typical head lettuce in Ohio, but we do produce many other kinds of lettuces, bibs, romaines, etc., and leaf lettuce. And again, the biggest production, except for small local markets, is on these muck soils. The disease I want to mention are bacterial leaf spot, which is the only one of these that is seed-borne. The head rot and slime rot and Pseudomonas soft rots we will talk about together, and then the Aspergillus phytoplasma. Now, bacterial leaf spot can also be a wilting pathogen. It's caused by Xanthomonas campestris pathovar vitians. As I mentioned, this is seed-borne, and that will be important in how this disease is managed. There are two pathotypes of this particular bacterium. We've done quite a lot of research over the years on this disease. And there are, again, in our area, two pathotypes. One that causes only a leaf spot, and the spots you see are kind of diffuse from a tiny necrotic lesion surrounded by a yellow halo. Here's some even minor flecks, to coalesced necrotic spots on the leaves. Now, there is also some pathotypes that cause systemic disease. So in that case, they will get into the vascular system and to move down through the plant into the roots and cause the plant to wilt. Now, Xanthomonas species are, in general, favored by warm, wet weather, and you're going to hear quite a bit about Xanthomonas species, particularly when we get into the solanaceous vegetables, the tomatoes and peppers. But in all the cases of Xanthomonads like warm weather, and like all bacteria, they like wet weather. So bacteria require rain or irrigation, splashing on the plant to move bacteria around. They are not windborne, except as aerosols or droplets. So how is this disease managed? First of all, with clean seed, and we have advocated the use of Clorox or hot water treatments. For systemic Xanthomonas, you really need a hot water treatment. But growers generally don't use these because often the seeds are also treated with a fungicide or insecticide, and they don't want to lose that, which would be lost in any kind of liquid treatment. But ideally, seed companies would do that. And although I don't know of any seed companies that that do these treatments for lettuce. They are done for a case of black rot, which is also Xanthomonas. There's a hot water treatment some producers, seed producers, will use to destroy that particular bacterium in the cabbage seeds. Crop rotation is an important cultural practice. And as I mentioned, the crop rotation and the muck soils is not what it should be just because of limitations in the amount of available muck soil or muck land. But the Xanthomonas is a pathogen that does not really survive very well over in our Ohio winters, except it's maybe associated with slowly decomposing tissues like crowns or that are thick and take a while to decompose. But they may last a little bit longer, but they really, a 2-year rotation is enough to probably avoid any soil-borne Xanthomonas. Of course, if it's introduced on seed, then you also have that coming in new, and it doesn't have any effect whether crop rotation was practiced or not. While growers in Ohio can't avoid a lot of rainfall in most years, there's generally a lot of rainfall at various times, but overhead irrigation should be avoided because that's, again, we get that rain splash or water splash that moves bacteria from one place, one plant to the next. Balancing the nitrogen fertility is a little bit tricky on the muck because, again, it has high levels of nutrients, but it is important to balance the nitrogen, not to have excess of nitrogen, because that encourages plants to grow in a rather quickly, and they will be more succulent than if they were growing a little bit more slowly, and that increases susceptibility. And of course, with bacteria, wounds should be avoided because that's a place where bacterial pathogens enter into plants. And of course, these can also enter into stomates or through the hydathodes. And the hydathodes, again, are where the vascular system comes through the leaf and ends at the end of the leaf. So it's kind of like a little tunnel there, and the bacteria can be sucked back into the vascular system as the plant warms and dries during the day. So there's not much that can be done about that, but at least avoiding wounding the plants through various crop operations is really important. Now, that's also the case with the bacterial soft rot. So the first I've mentioned here is Pectobacterium keratoverum, subspecies keratoverum. And this is a very wide host range soft rotting bacterium. It affects many different crops, not only just vegetables. So it is generally the major soft rotting bacterium on lettuce, but there are also some Pseudomonas species that can cause soft rot as well. This is favored by warm, wet conditions. Again, the wetter conditions, the more likely to have a problem with this. Again, the bacteria often enter the plants through the wounds, but they can also get in through stomates and hydathodes. And this is, again, another disease that's really favored by excessive nitrogen. And here's a picture of a soft-rotted lettuce plant where you see the internal structure from the crown up is completely liquefied by the soft rot bacterium. And I've seen this in a number of instances where this has happened. So it is really critical to manage this. Obviously, this plant is not saleable, and it's going to die if it hadn't up until that, which it hadn't up until that time. So again, in crop rotation, the Pseudomonas and the Pectobacterium are soil-borne pathogens. They survive nicely in the soil, but they have to live on something. And so once a susceptible host is gone, they will reduce in their populations. So at least 2 years, and possibly more if there was a serious problem with soft rot. Overhead irrigation, again, should be avoided. Balancing the nitrogen fertility is critical. Minimizing wounding, and then maximizing air circulation. And reason to maximize the air circulation is to get those plants dry as soon as possible, from dew in the morning or from an irrigation event or a rainfall event. So how you do that is they should be planted in open fields without windbreaks, uh, uh, trees, for example, woodlots, etc. So they should be, men often planted the rows with the prevailing wind so that the winds can move along and help those plants to dry. The last one I want to talk about is Astrorhynchus phytoplasma. Now, you should have learned what phytoplasmas are in your introductory plant pathology course. Because they've never been cultured, we'll mention that a little bit later. They are called Candidatus. Phytoplasma asteris is the main one, which is the Astrorhynchus phytoplasma. And now, again, this is not a seed-borne and not a soil-borne pathogen. This is transmitted by aster leafhoppers. And it has a wide host range. This disease, or this pathogen, includes amongst the vegetables, it includes lettuce, celery, carrots, etc. It was originally named because it was originally isolated from asters, a flower, but it can infect, essentially, as far as we know, anything that the aster leafhoppers can feed on, this usually can infect. And this is what it looks like. Well, let's back up. And the symptoms on lettuce they tend to look like a hormonal problem, which often happens with viruses. And so for many years, phytoplasma diseases were thought to be caused by a virus. Eventually it was figured out that it was phytoplasma, but you'll see this strappy looking leaf is distorted, discoloration. Oftentimes you'll see a very stunted plant. Sometimes there's a premature bolting in lettuce, and so the flowers are produced before they're supposed to be. So there are various number of symptoms, and we found in our research on Astrorhynchus that the strain of the pathogen makes a difference, so they can get different symptoms based on the strain. These are symptoms on carrots. This came from, we don't grow a lot of carrots in Ohio on a major production scale, but you can see these sort of small roots that are formed, this twisting and yellowing of the foliage, and these little tiny petioles in this case, and these little tiny malformed leaves, twisted and discolored. This is a more normal, on the normal carrot on the left. And then this picture will show you the discoloration and yellowing from the top in a carrot field. In celery, it's very obvious the kind of symptoms that you have. You can see this necrosis along the petioles of the celery plant, twisting, very common, and then the leaves produced are very small and twisted. So this is a serious problem in celery. Obviously, these plants are not marketable. And sometimes the carrots and other vegetables, the flavor can be completely off in an infected plant, becoming very bitter in taste. So these are what the phytoplasmas look like. We call them bacteria, that they're not exactly like bacteria. They're a type of bacteria. They're molecules. But we call them gram-positive-like, but since they have no cell wall, and gram reaction is based on the cell wall. That's just kind of give you an idea genetically what they're like, but except that they have no cell wall. And because they don't have a cell wall, they are pleomorphic, and that means that they have their various different shapes. They're kind of shape-shifting. In this plant, they are always confined to the phloem. So here in this cross-section, was done with transmission electron microscopy. You can see this phloem element that's completely packed with phytoplasmas. And you could see the shape here. They vary from this kind of, looks like a little potato shape. Here's a dumbbell shape. Here's one that looks circular but or global, but again, that was probably just one that was cut across in cross-section. So you can see, here's one that's sort of an oblique cut on there, so you can see how they generally look. Nobody has been able to culture these to date, and they are obligate parasites. It means that they can't survive outside the plant, or in this case, also outside the vector, the leafhopper vector. So, how are these managed? And again, Aspergillus has to be managed by managing the vector. And back in the 1970s, this was the sort of movement of the vector in the United States during from the spring, early spring in the South up until the early summer in the Midwest. That was all worked out by scientists at the entomologists actually at the University of Wisconsin. And this pathogen generally doesn't overwinter up north in Ohio or other northern states to any significant extent. It's possible that it is found in perennial weeds, but we haven't found that that's a significant source of inoculum for the leafhoppers when they come in. So the number how we get it is that the phytoplasma comes in on inoculative leafhoppers. That is, leafhoppers that have fed on an infected plant, and this is a reproductive circulative phytoplasma in that it actually reproduces inside the leafhopper, and it stays inside the leafhopper for that leafhopper's life. So when a leafhopper gets into and feeds on a plant, it will regurgitate or actually spit those leafhoppers back into the plant, into the vat, because the leafhoppers are feeding from the phloem. So they'll just drop those those phytoplasmas right into the phloem where they're happy. Now, some years, this is a serious problem with Aspergillus in lettuce or other crops, and other years it's not very serious. And some years where it's not serious is because the leafhoppers that came in were not inoculative. And this group from Wisconsin figured out in the 1970s, that you could use a bioassay to monitor the percentage of inoculative leafhoppers and determine, and then they developed a sort of a threshold to what percentage should you start spraying. And that's how you time your spraying of insecticides. Well, the bioassay took many weeks to perform, so by the time it was really too late. By the time you know what the percentage was, the leafhoppers have already done their job. And so we have gone to a PCR polymerase chain reaction assay to monitor the percentage of leafhoppers that are positive. And this can be done fairly easily. And we found that growers are really not interested in the thresholds. Essentially, if there's any percentage of inoculative leafhoppers, they will spray insecticides to kill the leafhoppers in their lettuce or other crops. How this generally works in a sort of just a big picture look at it is that the leafhoppers are surviving in the south, in the southern United States, for example, in Texas on various crops. And the winds early in the spring come from the south up to the north. So they are carried on these winds. They eventually make their way up to the Midwest in Wisconsin, for example. And then there are other winds that start blowing from the west to the east. And those are the ones where they are picked up from further west than Ohio, but from those states and moved across in an easterly direction into Ohio. So we usually don't see these inoculative leafhoppers getting into Ohio until about the early part of June. And as I indicated, growers, if we test those by PCR and find any of them, even a low percentage, less than 1% inoculative, they will get out the insecticide and spray. Now, there are some cultural practices that can be done, but honestly, the insecticide spray is the main means by which these things are controlled. So perennial host plants within the crop, those are weeds that might be a source of inoculum. Another potential source of the leafhoppers, which might be inoculative, would be forage legumes, which are nearby. And they can be sprayed before cutting so that the leafhoppers that are present there don't move over until the vegetable crops. And then the last one is avoid time lag, lettuce multicropping, which I'll explain this, although I will say as a caveat in the beginning is that growers really don't pay attention to this because they have other market forces that determine how often and where they plant lettuce. But essentially, how lettuce is produced on the muck soils, which is a high volume production, is that relatively narrow, long strips of lettuce plants are planted maybe 30 feet wide, but very long, and maybe a week one. And then week two, there may be another similar type of lettuce or a different type of lettuce that's produced in a similar size field right next to that, and then another strip next to that, and so forth. So this again is determined by what's needed or what they could sell and to their various buyers. So it's less related to disease management, and so we can't really get them to do that. But why it's a problem is that first crop of lettuce becomes infected, and the leaf hoppers then can feed on that, and then when that lettuce is cut, they moved on to the next lettuce plants, and etc. So that you can continually, if the leaf hoppers are not controlled by insecticides, continually have a problem with lettuce, with the leaf hoppers moving from lettuce field to field.